The Bob Murphy Show, episode 333.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews, conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Bob Murphy Show. Today I'm going to be speaking with, once again, Scott Horton, who is director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, a host of Anti-War Radio, and is the author of 4 books. He's conducted more than 6,000 interviews since 2003. Scott is mostly here talking about Israel and what's going on over there for this particular episode. As you know, if you've ever listened to Scott being interviewed before, once you get him going on a topic, that's what you're talking about. But no regrets, as the kids say. Very informative stuff. And we even end with a provocative challenge. So I will challenge you, dear listener. If Scott gets going and you're just thinking like, come on, man, no, that's just the wrong take. Or I can't believe, what, are you kidding me? Just hear him out. And then at the end, he throws down the gauntlet with my direction. And just if you're intellectually honest, he shows you what to do. All right, so that's let him make his case. One other quick note: about an hour and 10 minutes into the interview, Scott alludes to Trump saying something about Congress being influenced by Israel, and we insert a clip. But during the clip, you hear some like weird laughing. And that's because the clip I'm actually grabbing from Sam Cedars' Majority Report. So they were playing the clip on, his show, and then some of his staff was guffawing over, whatever Trump was saying. So anyway, I just want to explain that. All right, enough housekeeping. Here's my interview with Scott Horton. Scott, welcome back to the Bob Murphy Show.
Thanks, Bob. How are you doing?
Good. Well, we don't have 3+ hours to talk about Waco this time, so we'll have to condense it.
That's good.
So I know you've been making the rounds here, raising money for your institute. So go ahead and explain, what you're doing and what the institute's all about, and so forth.
Yeah. Well, okay. The Libertarian Institute is me and a bunch of great libertarians, including a lot of friends of yours and people that everybody's heard of. We got on our senior staff, we have the great Sheldon Richmond, my founding partner in the thing and libertarian legend. Of course, the great Jim Bovard, the most successful libertarian journalist in history and regular at the New York Post. Also, Ted Galen Carpenter. I don't know if everybody heard that last year, Cato got rid of their best guy on foreign policy because he was too good on Ukraine. And so now he writes for me and at the Institute and also at antiwar.com. And then, of course, we got the whole, and Lori Calhoun, of course, who I'm sure you're familiar with, formerly with the Independent Institute and author of We Kill Because We Can about the drone wars, and who is a real brilliant scholar. And we published her book, questioning the COVID company line as well. And then, we have the whole generation of all the 28 and 31-year-olds, Hunter Durensis, Kyle Anzalone, Keith Knight, of course, and did I say Connor Freeman and Patrick McFarlane? And I skipped Tommy Salmons. He's our resident philosopher. He's my same age. But all the rest of those guys, the whole generation of them are like 28 years old and really doing great stuff. Kyle, of course, I hired to replace me as opinion editor of antiwar.com. Mm-hmm. And so he's the one curating all the viewpoints at antiwar.com every day. And of course is a brilliant genius and is doing Judge Napolitano's show every week and this and that. At this point, we published 14 books. Oh, and I should say Keith and Kyle and Tommy and Patrick all have their own podcasts. Oh, and then recently, we added a bunch of new guys. We added William Bupert, who is a historian and a critic of American and anyone's counterinsurgency warfare techniques, which are all stupid and bankrupt and always fail. And then we have Jeremy R. Hammond, who everybody knows from the Walter Block debates and so forth. He is, bar none, the libertarian movement's foremost expert on the Israel-Palestine conflict, and published a book called Obstacle to Peace, which is absolutely fantastic. He also, more up your alley, Bob, you might know him from this. He wrote a book called Ron Paul versus Paul Krugman.
Yep.
All about their economics. Yeah. Great guy. And then Danny Sanchez, who's also an editor at FEE and a good friend of mine. He's now our Murray N. Rothbard Fellow. And we also just added a good friend of mine, Thomas Edlum, who is he is our William Norman Grigg Fellow. They were pals back in the John Birch days at the New American magazine when they both wrote for the New American. And Will, of course, the greatest libertarian among us in our era, who died back in 2017, was founding partner in the Institute with myself and Sheldon back then. So we named Tom Edlum's fellowship after him. And then, of course, you mentioned Waco there. First of all, we have the internet's single best by far. There's no comparison anywhere else. Archive of the truth about the Oklahoma City bombing and the cover-up about the Oklahoma City bombing. It includes a bunch of my own documents that I've saved up over the years, mostly from Jesse Trenadu, but also the vast lion's share of the credit goes to the great Richard Booth, who is America's foremost researcher in the Oklahoma City bombing and the heir to all of Roger Charles' work. And he and a woman named Wendy Painting, who wrote a book about it, they're basically the co-heirs of all the research of Roger Charles and J.D. Cash and Jesse Trenadu. And what we have there is just the full story, all the documents, all the best journalism, no kooky crap. They try to blame it on Al-Qaeda or even Saddam Hussein and all these kinds of things. But we got the real scoop there, which in a nutshell is that the neo-Nazis did it, and they were allowed to get away with it because they were all government informants and flip states witnesses. And the FBI, basically as competent as a bunch of Keystone cops, let the bombing happen right under their nose. And so then covered it up and clamped it all down and let the bad guys get away with it too. And so we have at libertarianinstitute.org/OKC, the ultimate Oklahoma bombing archive of the truth for independent researchers to go through all the FBI and Justice and ATF documents and everything else about it there. And now
these are like primary documents. It's not just, here's Scott Horton commenting on a bunch of stuff. It's like people who want to go do research.
It's nothing by me at all. No, it's nothing by me at all. It does include some of the very best journalism, such as, for example, James Ridgway in Mother Jones did a piece called In Search of John Doe 2, I think is in there. And there's a piece, some real pieces like one in Newsweek that really develops the story of the FBI undercover operation Patriot Conspiracy, otherwise known as PatCon, and its role in the background of all of this. So, and then, yes, this is all just government documents curated by the world's greatest expert, and that ain't me, that's Booth. And he's done such a brilliant job there. And then, as you know, Waco has been an important interest of mine ever since it happened in 1993. And I've done interviews with you about it, but I also did that approximately 13-hour kind of sort of special overview thing about it last year. And
but let me just plug that, as
sure.
So folks, again, I'll link to obviously all this stuff, folks, at this episode show notes page. But that 13-something hour thing, when that came out, when that dropped, I told you at the time, like I was coming up with reasons to continue driving around town, because I just wanted to I couldn't stop. Like, oh no, I got to listen to 20 more minutes. I can go to the store. I'll do that, and I was just coming up with reasons because it was. And so for people who just like, well, yeah, what more do I need to know? I know they went in there and they burned those people down and it was stupid and there was no reason to do it. Like you don't understand the 10th of it until you get into it. You're like, what? So.
Great. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And those people deserve to at least have the truth honored, since there's never going to be accountability for the people who perpetrated this horrible massacre against them, this atrocity against them. At least we could tell the truth about what happened there. And so, as you know, in that special, what happened is I got interviews with Branch Davidians, with religious experts and firearms experts and all kinds of stuff. But then I actually went to LA and I sat down for 3 days with Dan Gifford, who is the producer of Waco, The Rules of Engagement, and David Hardy, which is the best documentary about it, I should say. And David Hardy, who wrote This Is Not an Assault, which is the best book about it. And he's a lawyer and participated in getting buried evidence and all this stuff. Incredible book about it. And so I convinced David Hardy to turn over all of his files to me. And now he has. And the Libertarian Institute is now in possession of the great David Hardy. He's the guy who got the flashbang grenades that had been mislabeled as silencers out of the DPS evidence lockers, right? I mean, this guy's the absolute forefront of finding out the truth about Waco, the very greatest journalists and activists on the story. So we got his motherlode, all of his documents and all of his videos. And of course, it's going to be quite an effort to get that all digitized and get it all uploaded and organized and curated and what have you. But we're determined to do it. And so then that'll be at libertarianinstitute.org/Waco. And we'll have the ultimate document archive there. And, I don't know. These issues are very important to me when I was a kid. And I guess at that time, too, they fit in with the overall, like my more conspiratorial sort of thing about how evil and corrupt the government was. But I think you can forget all the secret society stuff and just look at business and government, politics, and the self-licking ice cream cone, the self-interested behavior of government agents, agencies and their agents in the way that they behave. And so I think, I take pride in the fact that the Oklahoma City bombing archive there, for example, this is a topic that what is supposed to kind of feel radioactive or whatever, too conspiratorial, not sure if it's kooky stuff, whether you want to touch it or not. None of this is kooky stuff. Maybe it's a kooky topic to say, wow, there's a whole other buried truth behind the Oklahoma bombing, but I don't give a damn about that because there ain't nothing kooky or nothing to be embarrassed about what we have in that archive for you. We stand on every single bit of it as, absolute fact, or at least, sound analysis and government documents, government claims and admissions and all of these things without a bunch of crazy stuff. And there are crazy theories about Oklahoma and I guess about Waco too, but we don't do crazy. Even if people think that these are somehow marginal topics, we're determined to give them absolute straight dope justice for the historical record. And that goes for all the rest of this stuff too. So, and then I hope that whatever, as soon as it's done, we'll all go post it all at archive.org or archive.is. So it's all saved forever too, no matter what.
So where do people go to donate to you guys?
Well, isn't that the question? libertarianinstitute.org/donate. And look, I'll just say, because there was a time where I was a little embarrassed because it's sort of like, it's just me and Sheldon and Will and like, come on, we're just trying to keep the lights on, folks. But at this point now, like, I don't have to feel slimy like a salesman at all. Like, I am just proud, absolutely beyond belief of the group that, the only credit I get is just putting the team together. You know what I mean?
You're like the what's it, Professor Xavier. You see everyone's potential and you assemble a team. Yeah.
Yeah. But man, are they great. They are just great. The people that we got here, I mean, you heard the names there. I mean, just Sheldon and Carpenter and Bovard and Calhoun. And this is just our leaders. You know what I mean? And we got this whole giant staff of all these great libertarians turning out such great work. And, Keith Knight has got, I think, 2 books coming. We're about to publish. We published 14 books so far, 4 of mine and 10 others, including James Bovard's latest, Last Rights, The Death of American Liberty, which is sort of a takeoff on his 1990s book, Lost Rights. And of course, Tom Wood's book, Diary of a Psychosis, about the COVID lockdown regimes and all that. We just proudly put those out. And we're fixing to put out William Van Wagenen, who is I'm like proud to say, like, what can I say? It's just true. This is America's single best historian on Obama's dirty war in Syria 10 years ago. And there are a lot of Americans who were really good on Syria. I wouldn't deny credit to any of them, but William Van Wagenen is the best. And he wrote, like, I don't know, man, what, 15 or 20 of these gigantic, like 10,000 word essays for the Libertarian Institute, exploring every aspect, all the most important aspects of that war and what was really going on there. And it's the most unbelievable treason. I mean, Barack Obama makes Benedict Arnold look like George Washington, dude. When you know the real story of America siding with Osama bin Laden's men in Syria, and pull what's left of either of our hair out there, buddy. It's just something. And anyway, we're putting that out soon. Of course, I'm working on my book, Provoked, about how Washington started the new Cold War with Russia and the war in Ukraine. And I know that's long overdue, but I am now hard at work cutting it down. I got it up to, Bob, don't kick me in the shin. I got it up to 1,400 pages, but now I'm cutting it back down, and I got it down to 1,130, and progress making still, like, every day. I'm working on trying to get it down to a reasonable, readable length for you people. Yeah, man. So the future looks bright. I mean, we got a hell of an institute. We got all these guys writing books for us, all these things. And I can also proudly say that, unlike the Cato Institute and maybe some other big shots, we don't waste our donor money on a bunch of, you know, ridiculous expenses like a glass castle in Washington, D.C. Or, you know, somebody told me this story about going to a Cato function, I guess in D.C., and it was like at the Four Seasons or something comparable. I think they said the Four Seasons. It was like the thickest carpet you've ever stepped on in your life, like in this extremely fancy ballroom with an open bar. I was like, this whole thing must have cost $30,000 or something. Yeah. Like some incredible amount of money just for some people to stand around. Like, probably they didn't raise that much that night. You know, I don't know. Maybe they did. But we're not like that. We're not extravagant like that at all. Everybody's money goes essentially to the account and then is dispersed to the writers. Like, that's it. Help me pay my guys and the costs of producing the books that we publish. Again, 14 and counting. And I think anybody be, you know, really impressed by the catalog of the books that we published so far. And in fact, I'm sorry, Bob, because I neglected to mention our latest book is by Gary Vogler, and it's called Israel, winner of the 2003 Iraq oil war. And Gary was basically the American civilian viceroy of Iraqi oil during Iraq War II, and major advisor to the Iraqi oil ministry and to the American corporations there, and to the coalition provisional authority and the occupying army and the Green Zone State Department command and the rest. And so what happened?
What, he just became disillusioned with what happened?
Well, so what happened was, I'd have to go back. I forget exactly where he made his break. He had written a previous book where he says, like, oil wasn't what the war was about at all. I don't know what you're talking about. And then I think kind of by the end of that book, and I actually have not had a chance to read his first book yet, but from what I've heard, that I think by the end of that book, he's like, well, maybe there was a little something to it or something. And then what happened was he read my book, and I don't know if you remember this part. There's a lot in it, but in my Iraq War II chapter, I have a whole thing about how Chalabi, the Iranian-backed Iraqi defector, had convinced the American neoconservatives that if they would get rid of Saddam and put him and his friends in power, then they would reopen the old British oil pipeline from Mosul or Kirkuk to Haifa, Israel. And Netanyahu bought it, and the neoconservatives, who are essentially just Israeli agents in America, bought it. And this was a huge part of their motivation for the war, was they're going to save the Israelis a nickel a gallon. Because previously, remember how, sorry, I always do this to you, Bob. Remember how in Iraq war, in the Iran-Iraq war in the 80s, Reagan backed Saddam, but the Israelis backed Iran. Just because the Iranian Revolution had happened and those radical Islamic fundamentalist Shiites had taken over, they didn't care. The Israelis continued to get along with them all the way through the 1980s. That's why when Reagan switched sides temporarily during Iran-Contra and was selling missiles to the Ayatollah, he went through Israel. And he said, we'll resupply you. You sell the missiles we already gave you to them, right? And so part of that was there was a secret oil pipeline from the port of Aqaba. You know that little divot on the northern shore of the Red Sea, right before you get to the Suez Gate there in Jordan? It's called the Gulf of Aqaba, and the Iranians would deliver oil by ship there. And then there was a
No, I don't know that. Just to answer your question, go ahead.
Okay. Right.
No, you go ahead. Don't worry about it. I'm
Yeah.
bad at geography. I'm just making a
All right.
joke.
But anyway, so there was at the near Suez in the north of the Red Sea.
Mm-hmm.
There's a Gulf of Aqaba there, and the Iranians had, Mark Rich, the guy that Bill Clinton pardoned on his last day in office,
Mm-hmm.
who was this like Israeli American, I think, like global oil magnate. He had this secret pipeline that he'd constructed from the port of Aqaba to Israel.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And they were still getting all this Iranian oil. But then when Yitzhak Rabin turned on Iran in 1993, it actually lasted a couple more years. And I believe they finally shut it off in 1995. So then they're like, well, now we have to pay the global market price for oil. And we don't want to do that. So we'll just get the Americans to invade Iraq for us, so we can save a little bit on the price of oil. And that was a huge part of Netanyahu and his faction of Likud, and therefore the American neoconservatives' motive for lying us into that horrible war. And of course, the moral of the story is, well, what happened was Gary Vogler read my book and said, yep, that's right, all right. And I know those names and I know these people, and this sure is true. And he left a great review of it on Amazon saying, I was there. Nobody else is right about this except this guy who's the one who's got it nailed. And then he came to us and through a friend, and we decided to have him write a sequel to his previous book, that this is what it was really about. And here's what he knows about the neocon plan and all that. And it's really something. And it's timely for us, for our discussion now, because JD Vance just had some text messages leaked where he says, geez, if we just listened to Israel, we'd have never gone to war in Iraq. It's just like, oh man, tell me you don't really think that, but anyway, so that's our latest book. And that, we just put that out, and people can get that book and all these other great books as kickbacks, a gift from us as a token of our appreciation for your support of our nonprofit organization. We got all these great books for people who are interested in them. And I guess this call really goes out to the extraordinarily wealthy financial capitalists in the Bob Murphy audience.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't it a funny thing that the libertarian movement runs off of nonprofit organizations? I mean, we're all trying to dodge taxes as best we can. And we don't really have that much to just sell you, like per article we're going to charge you. That's not going to work. So what it is, it's like a museum. You donate at the door if you enjoy it, if you think it's important. And so this is how we are able to continue and to hopefully thrive into the future, is with, yes, by all means, and I'm serious about this and as grateful and appreciative as I could possibly be for the 5s, 10s, 20s, 30s, and 50s and $100 donations. Those are absolutely fantastic, and they do help pay our writers and staff. But what we really need is rich guys who can afford a couple of tens of thousands of dollars, offer some matching funds, these kinds of things. We need those to really be able to continue this project, and especially to be able to develop, for example, the Waco archive, to publish more books and all the other things we need to be able to do. And so for those who can't afford it, those who are killing it in Bitcoin money right now, and those who, sold your third vacation home because you really don't need it, just help me pay my guys, right? Like my truck is 29 years old. I'm not getting a new one. Like I don't need to make payments on expensive things. I just need to pay my guys. That's it.
Yeah. And no one has ever criticized you for wearing $1,000 suits. I've never heard that. So.
No, that's not really my thing. And I do have $1,000 boat, but it was like the cheapest one on Craigslist. And I've taken very good care of it.
The other thing too is just the model, like, I speaking for the Mises Institute, like all their books and stuff, like, it has to be the PDF has to be available for free, because that's going to get, we want everyone to be able to go read Human Action or whatever, Theory of Money and Credit, whatever. But then, of course, for new books, that's the tricky thing. Like, there's costs to support the author and the research and But then once it's up, the marginal cost of us letting someone download the PDF is virtually zero, but you still need the support to make the thing exist in the first place. So it's kind of a tricky business model.
Yep, it is. And I mean, what it comes down to is for people who understand how important it is that we are free and that the people who come after us are able to be free, that they got to just be willing to invest in these kinds of projects. That's what we need, right? Is 10 more Libertarian Institutes, 20 more. And we need people to understand that liberty works. Private property and free exchange work. And all this politicization of the economy is just, it leads to wrecks everywhere you go. I'm writing this book about the Russia stuff. And, a big part of that is the shock therapy. And if you listen to the liberals, of course, they say too much capitalism too fast. But there's this great libertarian, I'm sure you know him, named Peter Bottke, who wrote all about the shock therapy. And of course, what happened was the commies, or the sort of pseudo former commies in Russia, they just couldn't let their government intervention go. They just couldn't bear to see big industries fail or go into real bankruptcy and be handed over to actual economic rather than connected political actors. And so that's why shock therapy didn't work, is because it was neoliberalism instead of libertarianism. What they needed was real ass free market capitalism. And the more half-assed it was, the remnants of communism left in it was what ruined it. That was what was wrong with it. It wasn't the shock of it. It was that they weren't really ever allowed to see that policy through in any real way. And so we just see this time and time again. I mean, and look at our economy now. Look at how corrupt the United States of America is now, because our government has such this massive budget that all just gets divvied up into corruption, right? It's just interest groups. Pressure is what decides how all that money is spent. And so, like, people talk about the remnant or whatever, like somebody has to be standing firm for free markets. And, the conservatives now more and more are taking this more Trump populist line that we need intervention for labor instead of for management, which, I'm not for either, but you can see how the intervention has been on the side of management for quite a while now. And then, so instead of saying, no, we're going to stop intervening on behalf of those who've already made it and instead start intervening on behalf of the workers, which is also kind of supply side intervention there. Instead, we're going to just do nothing and let things shake out. They can't do that. They got to try to swing the other way. And of course, the liberals are the liberals. So they're getting more and more socialist all the time. And you can only get so good capitalism out of them. And so who's left to defend real free market capitalism except the libertarians? And it used to be the right would pay a lot of lip service to this stuff, but now they're even abandoning that in favor of more nationalist populism and that kind of deal. So we got to have people we need, and especially this new younger generation of people who understand libertarianism and are willing to fight for its principles and explain them to the people so we don't have to go down such a disaster. I mean, like, people talk about the fall of the empire, the end of dollar dominance. I had an expert friend of mine talking about our debt to GDP ratio is getting right near that magic number where things fall apart, man. And people are really worried about these kinds of things. I don't know how seriously to take, like, the timeliness of these crises. But I know things are not looking good right now. But so then obviously the question is, well, what next then? What are we supposed to do if it ain't what we've been doing? Mm-hmm. And so, of course, the socialists and the right populists are going to have all their interventionist answers. We got to have somebody out there holding it down for freedom, man. So that's
the other thing. Yeah. The other thing too, like with the types of books you're rattling off there is what you guys are putting out. So as an economist, if you're a free market economist and you're, informed by libertarian political philosophy, you can kind of distill down some general principles. And, there's Henry Hazlitt's book, I have a primer, other people have things, But for the topics you're talking about, you really need someone who just knows a bunch of facts and history to lay it out. It's not just armchair philosophizing about general principles. Like, you kind of need to know, you get what I'm saying. So people do need to sit down and read books on this stuff if they really want to know, like, yeah, what the heck's going on in the Middle East? You can't just think about the non-aggression principle and bang that out in 20 minutes. You really have to go read a bunch of stuff just to know the history.
Right. And now, I admit we don't quite hold a candle to the Mises Institute, but we do have Austrian school economists on our staff. Danny Sanchez is an economist, and so is our new William Norman Grigg Fellow, Thomas Edlam, is an economist as well. And so is Joseph Solis Mullins, who I kind of poached from you guys, who we published his great book, The Fake China Threat and Its Very Real Danger, last year. And so these guys are, and of course, Sheldon is Jack.
I don't know what his formal training is, but Keith Knight, I'm sure, could teach an undergrad class in Austrian economics.
He absolutely could.
Yeah.
You know, Keith is his own force of nature. If I had to do just this entire fundraiser just to say, like, help me pay Keith, that ought to be enough for you people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what would we do without this kid?
So I jotted down some things here in terms of like what I wanted to ask you about. So as far, I think it's pretty clear to people that, you know, for some reason, Israel seems to have an inordinate influence on U.S. politics. Why is that? Like you said a minute ago, like, oh, so if Israel could get America to go to fight a war on its behalf, so I understand why the Israelis would want to do that. That makes sense. But what do you know what I mean? Like what can, like, I understand some U.S. churches and why they feel a special affinity for Israel and everything, but is that that's not the political reason, is it? Like, so I don't know. Can you just explain
let's start there. Let's start there. I mean, that is absolutely a huge deal for a massive segment of Republican voters, that they believe that current day Israel is prophesied in the New Testament, that it is the precursor to the return of Christ and the apocalypse and the rapture and all of these things. And to put it in a like the silliest way, in a way, like, you know, John Hagee from the Cornerstone Church down there in San Antonio, and you know, Jerry Falwell and Robert Tilton and that whole kind of band. Is Tilton still around? That whole kind of band of, I would say, mostly like obviously phony and not even sincere Protestant, you know, Southern evangelists. They preach this and they corral a huge amount of votes around this issue. And they're, I was going to say, the silly way to put it is they're trying to force Jesus to come back, right? Like somehow this is God's plan, but also hurry the hell up. And nobody wants to die alone. So we demand that Jesus come back and start the nuclear war now, or whatever it is that they think the book of Daniel says, or whatever. Speaking of the Branch Davidians, right? This is the Branch Cornerstone Church and their pretension to interpret these biblical prophecies to say that Americans now must support Israel now, when the Bible's not about Israel now. The Bible is about Israel then, and, you know, 3,000 to 2,000 years ago. And that's about where it ends. And so, but there are extremely sincere people, Bob, who just think, well, it says in the Bible, you have to bless Israel, or God's going to curse your country, man. It's as simple as that. It's his highest command, is that the people of the world protect the people of Israel. It says it right there in the Holy Book. And so for people who are convinced of that, then, you know, they're really bound to that. That's not a political opinion. That's their entire conception of their role in the world, according to the dictates of the creator of the universe, and what they're supposed to do and believe and how to behave. And so it's a real problem, frankly. Like, it's, if it was a bit more marginal, I guess it wouldn't matter. But this is, there are times where these people get to call shots, or at least intervene and prevent good things from happening. Like, for example, after September 11th, Colin Powell, following in James Baker's footsteps from the father's administration previously said, now's our chance to push through a two-state solution and a Palestinian state. This is one of the leading causes of terrorism against our country, is Israel's brutality in their occupation of these poor people. And Bush said, okay, Colin Powell, if you say so. And then the evangelicals came to town on orders from Israel, and, you know, they're on polite suggestions from their friends.
Right.
And led by Tom DeLay, who was at that time just the majority whip in the House, right? The third ranking member of the House came and told the president of the United States, listen, you'll be a one-term president. All these evangelicals will be staying home in 2004, 100%. You better knock this off right now. And okay. Bush backed down. And Ariel Sharon and all of his men laughed in his face about it. And so that is a huge part of it. You know, there's a great speech.
So can I just stop you? So just like on the left, like how labor unions have a lot of strength because there's a few key decision makers that can swing a lot of votes. You're saying in right-wing, you know, Republican circles, there are some mega churches and influential pastors and whatever that if they really think that, oh no, you're doing the wrong thing vis-a-vis Israel, which they may earnestly believe for, you know, for religious reasons, that they can affect a lot of votes one way or the other. And so that's, you know, you can't ignore that as a politician if you're on the right.
Absolutely. Millions of votes, millions of votes, maybe tens of millions in a presidential election. It's a huge deal, huge deal. And no one could run for national office, certainly in the South, like a senator or a congressman, but certainly a president could not run in the Republican Party speaking any other narrative than what the Israelis want the Israelis get. And Bush Sr. was punished for this. And people can look at this on mondoweiss.net. The great Philip Weiss is a great critic of Israel. And he has a piece about how George Bush Sr. blamed Israel for his loss in 92. And this is something that I paid attention. I was a ninth grader in 92. And I was paying very close attention from a ninth grader point of view to that campaign. And I got to tell you, they never said, okay, everyone, Israel has decided they're switching from Bush to Clinton now. And that's why you're getting Rock the Vote turned up to 12 on MTV and all of this crap. They never said that, but that's what it was. It was a giant Israeli influence operation. And I don't know whether Ross Perot had something to do with that or not. Some say he split more votes from the Democrats than the Republicans. I don't know about that. Maybe because he did speak kind of a populist thing, and I could see maybe some union people. I don't know. Anyway, I don't know about the Perot angle, but I do know that Bush blamed the Israelis for turning on him because, see, Iraq War I ended a year and a half before the election. So he thought, yeah, I'm riding high. I got 90%. I can do what I want. But a year and a half's a long time. And so he had pushed for this Madrid conference, which was supposed to be where they would write up the framework for really pursuing what became Oslo and the two-state solution. And the Israelis just resented the hell out of it. And their partisans in America really turned on him about that. And more importantly, they bankrolled the hell out of Clinton and gave him a ton of positive media attention and all of that.
What's funny in that, I don't know if you remember this, Scott. I know you're a fan of comedy. So I don't know, were you watching Saturday Night Live in that part of your life?
Yeah, in the Kevin Nealon era, absolutely.
Yeah, and so I don't know if you remember this, but there was a period where Bush Sr. was so popular that SNL had skits about the Democrats not wanting to be the nominee because they thought they were going to get destroyed. And they had like, I forget, I think it was Phil Hartman was playing Mario Cuomo, and he just stepped like, so that, you know, it showed like a debate. And then the moderator said, so why should Democrat voters want you to be the person to go against the incumbent Republican? And then Cuomo steps forward, Phil Hartman goes, I have mob ties, and then just steps back, and so that was the joke. And then, so they said, yeah, let this idiot Bill Clinton come with his Southern, okay, moron. And then, he discovered that, oh no, it's the economy stupid, and, Carville the genius and all that. But that was an underdog. Like I said, they kind of let him, or at least I can't say what was going on in behind the scenes, but I know it was such that SNL was making skits about how nobody would dare want to go against Bush right after the Gulf War because he was, he was so popular.
Yep. But so he pushed hard against the Israelis, and they turned on him, and their friends in the media turned on him. And after all, it had been 12 years of the Republicans, and it was a recession. And so,
Bush had raised taxes, even though he said, read my lips. Yep.
And Bill Clinton is a talented sort of a sociopath. I mean,
he's charming. He's charming.
Widely report being charmed and won over by him when he pretends to pay attention to what they're saying or whatever it is. People are pushovers, man. He's a glad handler. People like that, I don't know. So there was a lot to it. I'm not just saying Israel's in control of everything, but they had their role in there. I mean, they pushed their position on that. And Bush Sr. by name blamed them for it too. People can read that. And I forget, there may be more particulars to his criticism than I remember. But anyway, so back to your original question, we sort of started with the born again Christians because that was sort of the way that you ended your question. I would not say they're the center of the thing. But that's a huge part of it. But, basically, if you read The Israel Lobby by Mearsheimer and Walt, it started out as an essay that they wrote for the London Review of Books, which was going to be published in The Atlantic, but they chickened out. They published it in the London Review of Books, and they later expanded it into a full book. That's where that Tom DeLay anecdote comes from, by the way. And they show, for one example, what a huge role they played in lying us into Iraq War II and pressuring us into Iraq War II. But I mean, the bottom line, and there's a lot more to it. We can talk about Grant Smith and his great books about all their evil machinations behind the scenes and law breaking. But I believe the bottom line, I think Grant would agree with this, that overall the bottom line is that they play the game of democracy really well. They have a ton of money. They're highly organized, and they're exempt from the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Everybody else has to register as a foreign agent. And then that comes with people's, more limited willingness to be influenced and work with people. But the Israelis, through the American Israel Public Affairs Committee especially, but there's quite a few of their adjunct organizations, they're exempt from FARA and always get away with it. And so they're able to just spend, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, so they spent $500 million a year on candidates. There was just Glenn Greenwald was sarcastically congratulating AIPAC, who unashamedly tweeted out just last week that every candidate that they backed in the primaries this year won. And when they say backed, they mean with a serious amount of money. And they stay highly organized. So if there's a congressman who refuses to go along with them, refuses to put out the statements they want, vote the way that they want, or even, in the campaign doesn't want to kowtow to them, then they will declare a vendetta. And they will say, like, if you cross us, we will bankroll whoever your primary opponent is. We don't care what that person's position is on any other thing. We will bankroll your primary opponent. And if you win anyway, then we'll bankroll your general election opponent. And if you win anyway, then we'll see you in 2 years. And they don't forget and they work really hard at it. And this year, they're claiming scalps. They're bragging about it. That you go up against us, we will do everything we can to back pro-Israel candidates in the primaries to stop you. That's their issue, and they play that game, and there's no one to stop them. You can't be the anti-Israel lobby in any organized way. No billionaire is going to finance that, first of all, the way the Israel lobby is financed by some of the wealthiest people in the country. No one's going to put themselves against them in that way. And then, of course, even the conversation we're having right now, and I know that good thing we're both kind of marginal over here. Otherwise, we would have to suffer serious attacks for being supposed.
Why are you guys for the Holocaust? I don't understand.
They would smear us as anti-Semites for daring to go against Israel just because they get to hide behind the fact that it's the Jewish state. But they made it that way. And they put their religion's symbol on their nation's flag. And then they claim, Netanyahu claims to be the leader of all Jews in the world, even though that's completely preposterous. But that's kind of the way that they say it, so that then if you criticize them, they say that you're criticizing Jews, when that's not what you're talking about at all. But it's an extremely convenient excuse. and they use it all the time to shut down dissent, to shut down debate. You hear it all the time right now. Anybody protesting against what they're doing to kill these poor people in the Gaza Strip, they go, you just hate Jews. Oh, look at the terrible anti-Semitism. You know, the governor of Texas just blanketly declared that all anti-Gaza war protests are anti-Semitic in their nature, and therefore, he says, illegal, and you'll go to jail. What?
Yeah.
Like, even if it was true that it was anti-Semitic, that's not illegal. But it is in the state of Texas, according to the governor, who serves the interests of a foreign power, who wouldn't dare cross them. You look at J.D. Vance saying all the stupid things he's saying about Iran right now. Like, I'm not trying to cut the guy slack. I don't know, man. I'd like to believe in a politician, but I'm not one to, unless his name is Ron Paul. So, but like, I can see how he has no choice, right? What's he going to say? I ain't afraid of no Ayatollah. He can't say that. He'd be in deep trouble. And right now, he's trying to keep from being figuratively shot anyway, so that he can help Trump win and become the vice president. And so he has to kowtow to Israel because they got him up against the wall, and it goes for all of them. And you know, it sucks. It's such a cheap excuse, the anti-Semitism accusation, because as you know, anyone who's lived on the internet for more than a few months, I guess, can tell you that people who actually hate Jews are perfectly happy to tell you that, and are perfectly happy to try to convince you why you should too. Right? Nobody who actually is an anti-Semite goes around denying that they are and saying very specific things like the government of the state of Israel did this thing today that I object to. That's not how anti-Semites talk. And also, anyone who hates Jews also hates Arabs and Muslims and doesn't care about them and isn't interested in sticking up for the Palestinians. So it's obviously, the whole thing is a completely stupid red herring. You know, they accuse leftists. I saw Bill Maher. Well, how come it's okay for leftists to hate the Jews? And it's just like, because you're lying. That's why Bill Maher, who claims to be an atheist, but somehow is strictly partisan for Israel and is perfectly willing to lie about leftist kids, who the first thing out of their mouth when they wake up in the morning, it's you're a racist, you're a racist. That's what they tell their cereal in the morning. You're a racist. But no, these people are the world's worst racists now. And they're all just racist against Jews now, huh? How stupid is that? How stupid is a right-winger to let Israeli partisans convince them that that is true? That young, twisted, hippie children are anti-Semites? Get the hell out of here with that. But that's all they have, Bob. You know why? Because their behavior is indefensible. That's why. Because they're bloodthirsty killers. They take our money, they turn it into high explosives, and then they murder little children with it, with glee. They call them animals. They go, they're just animals, like they're slaughtering livestock. And they're counting on us to think, well, geez, they couldn't be that sadistic, to just give them their free pass and let them go. But that's what they say.
Well, on this point, I heard you recently, you were on Dave Smith's Part of the Problem, and you had an interesting point, and you said, there's a reason we call it October 7th, because it was done by supper time. You remember that?
Yeah.
Can you just elaborate on what point you were making there? Because I knew, of course, the general theme of what you were saying, but I never thought of it put so succinctly.
Yeah, sure. Well, look, it's such a sad thing. People they don't understand this. TV will never show you a map and just explain who's occupying who and just what is going on here, man. There's only one time that I know of that they did. It was Obama's lame duck session when he abstained and did not veto a UN Security Council resolution. And then MSNBC, in defense of Obama there, put up a map and explained who's occupying who. And here are the Jewish-only roads and this and that and whatever, and explained it. But it was like a magnesium bright in the absolute void of space, right? This never happens ever. And so it was the exception that proves the rule so badly. It was almost embarrassing, right? The fact is that, well, let's start with this here. Ben Shapiro is a liar, right? The leader of the American conservative movement somehow is this ridiculous little, well, I'm going to be careful with my words here. This ridiculous Israeli partisan he tells people whenever there's a problem over there, he says, well, what would we do if the Mexicans were firing rockets over the border? And see, right there, he's lying, because Mexico is a nation state. Gaza's not a nation. Gaza is an Indian reservation. They're already licked, whooped, beaten, conquered back 9 years before I was born in 1967. They lost, and they've been under Israeli occupation and control ever since then. So we're not talking about the Mexicans, meaning the Mexican national government and its armed forces attacking us across the border. What we're talking about is, assuming we had like a much more militarized and oppressive situation with Indian reservation out west somewhere, that they had broken out of their pen and came and scalped some Anglos in town, right? That's what happened. And so the answer to that would not be a war, unless, you know, you got Andrew Jackson for a president, but like presumably if we're civilized, that would be treated as a crime and the perpetrators would be held responsible. And if they resist, then tough. They get to receive violence for resisting their arrest. But what you wouldn't tolerate in this country in such a situation is a massive bombing campaign against the Navajo reservation, a 10-month-long bombing campaign, slaughtering their women and children by the tens of thousands. And so that's why it was over on October 7th, is because it wasn't an attack by a nation state. Palestine is not the nation state next door. Palestine is the former would-be nation that Israel is sitting on top of. There is no Palestine. And so look, if you don't know about it and they go, well, it's the Israelis versus the Palestinians, well, you just assume the Palestinians have a nation because everybody has a nation, right? But no, they're licked, whooped, beaten prisoners on a reservation. And what happened was they broke out and they did a spectacular attack. They slaughtered innocent civilians, as you know, including an extended family member of mine was an Israeli peace activist, by the way, who was against the way these people were being treated and was trying to do her part to help to set them free, who got caught up in this thing, as there was a whole peace activist event attached to that rave. And I believe all those people were killed. It's a horrible and tragic irony of the situation. But then that was it. It's October 7th because it didn't last. We don't say October. We don't call it the first week or the second week in October, right? It wasn't the second week in October. It was just that day. And then the whole thing was over. And then after that, Bob, they are surrounded. After that, come out with your hands up. After that, you're talking about like a Waco siege situation. Not that the Branch Davidians went into town and murdered innocent people. They did not. But I'm just saying, once it was the ATF who came to their property, period. But point being, they're surrounded, they're helpless. So you don't have to set them on fire. You don't have to do anything. The FBI, the Netanyahu's regime, they have the budget to stand around. In fact, there was Mossad at Waco, or IDF at Waco, it's reported, or at least rumored. I know the British SAS were there. They're just having a good old time. But anyway, they didn't have to do this at all. They could have demanded, you know, inside Hamas, the Al-Qassam Brigade is actually the violent armed wing. Hamas itself is a political organization. It's like the IRA and Sinn Féin. And so could you potentially negotiate with the leaders of the civilian, governmental side of Hamas that, listen, you have to give us A through F names here for us to execute, and then we're going to figure out a new way forward after this, something. Like, could they have done that? Yeah. Could they have negotiated this whole time? Certainly. And the Hamas has all these hostages to trade, and the Israelis have total power over them to trade away. And so, you know, the headline on antiwar.com today is Mossad chief accuses Netanyahu of obstructing the negotiations. Right? Imagine the CIA director accuses Biden of obstructing the negotiations. Imagine how animated the CIA director would have to be at Biden's absolute intransigence for him to go public in that way. That's what's happening in Israel right now. And so, and by the way, the only reason they were able to break out is because of absolute negligence on the part of the Israeli in the first place. Absolute dereliction of duty by the Israeli intelligence and military command there. And Netanyahu's own responsibility as well. Because, first of all, to stay out of prison for his corruption, he had to join into a new coalition government with these right-wing kooks who are completely religiously motivated settlers, expanders, conquerors of the West Bank, and the rest of the Palestinians if they have their way. And also, he had to try to pass this Supreme Court law to nullify the power, reduce the power of the Supreme Court so that the Supreme Court wouldn't stop them from their new settlement expansion projects. And that led to all of the controversy over the court and all the massive protests in Tel Aviv, which you remember, and it led to mass resignations among the officers inside the military and in the intelligence services and police services, resigning in protest over what Netanyahu was doing. So that left their leadership in disarray. Then the religious kooks, Ben Gvir and Smotrich and their people, they wanted to have this, what's it called? I'm sorry, it's on the tip of my tongue. This religious harvest festival. I'm so sorry, it's right on the tip of my tongue, Bob. It was this religious harvest festival that they wanted to have on the West Bank, which is like very provocative because I guess it's on Palestinian land that they got to trespass on to do it or whatever the thing is. So they pulled hundreds of soldiers away from Gaza, pulled hundreds of soldiers away from Gaza guard duty and sent them off to the West Bank. And then it's like idiocracy or something. They had automatic machine guns and sensors, and they had just outsourced the imprisoning of these people to technology. So Hamas, when they launched their attack, the first thing they did was use drones to attack all the cell phone towers to break the Israelis' communication systems. And then, you know, they launched these surprise attacks on the military bases and so forth and just caught them with their pants down on a Saturday morning. And so in other words, if the Israeli military had been doing their job enforcing their medieval siege on these poor people, they could have protected themselves from any attempted jailbreak like this. They were just doing a lazy, half-assed job and got caught unawares. But again, that's why we call it October 7th, because once they swung into action, finally, by like that evening, they killed everybody who was outside the fence and chased everybody else back in it. And that was it. And the whole thing was over.
Okay, so that leads into what I was going to ask, because what a lot of defenders of the IDF say in this situation is, oh, so Israel's supposed to sit there and just have people every once in a while just come in and rape a bunch of their women and kill a bunch of people and go back, and then, oh, well, we're not allowed to retaliate according to Scott Horton because that would, we might kill an innocent baby. And so I know you're just going to have to repeat some of what you just said, but like, what do you say to that? Because a lot of people that's the way they're acting. Like, apparently Israel's just supposed to sit there. No other nation in the world would tolerate something like that. They would go bomb the crap out of people. But Israel, what are they supposed to do, Scott?
Yeah. I mean, those people are just repeating ridiculous propaganda, and they are begging the question in the actual sense of that term, assuming their conclusion. And they don't know that Hamas are the aggressors here. In fact, it's Hamas that has the right, and the Palestinian people have the right to resist occupation with violent means. That's enshrined in international law. Who doesn't have the right is Israel, which has been ordered by the UN Security Council, including an American vote, to withdraw from the occupied territories. And you know what they do? They say, yeah, but the French version doesn't say the. So that just means we can withdraw from one little piece of something that we occupy down in the Sinai, and that's good enough, when that's such a lie, and they know it. That's not, the international law is for everybody else to obey, not Israel. They can do whatever they want.
I didn't realize that. So their official position is we're not ignoring that resolution. We're in compliance because we withdrew troops from a particular occupied some territory that had been occupied.
Yeah. So instead of saying, oh, it doesn't say the occupied territories, which would, of course, they admit, be inclusive of all of the occupied territories. But so they claim that the French version doesn't have the, so that's their wiggle room. It's ridiculous. And that's Security Council Resolution 242. But anyway, and regardless of that, I'm not invoking UN authority, but I'm just saying that the reality of the situation, as far as who has the right to resist, it's recognized in the law that it's the occupiers who have the right to resist. It's the Israelis who have simply kidnapped these people because they were born with the wrong religion, holding them in this cage because they're not Jewish and because they would dilute the Israeli supermajority of their ethno-religious apartheid state. It's completely crazy. No other country would allow this. No other country in the world treats their ethnic minority this way. And especially on our dime and in our name and with this level of cruelty. They don't have anything to compare it to. Oh, you're singling Israel out. Yeah, well, Mexico's not doing this to their Mayans right now. And if they were, we'd have a problem. You know, this is completely out of control, the way that they treat these people. It's completely unfair what they do to them. And we have to address this too, that there's no evidence that Hamas raped anyone that day. And I don't care if they go, oh, well, you love Hamas and apologize for them. I'm talking about the truth. There are apparently some Palestinians raped a couple of people, but that's just regular Joes who broke out of the fence with Hamas and went and got away. Some people stole things and whatever.
Oh, okay, so just to be clear, you're not saying no Israelis were raped on October 7th. You're saying that wasn't part of Hamas.
That's right. Okay. Hamas did not do it. And if people have in their minds still all the stories that they heard last October about what Hamas had done, then they should know that that's all a bunch of crap. What really happened was the Israelis went crazy, as Haaretz just confirmed again last week, and they issued what's called the Hannibal Directive, which says it's better to kill people being kidnapped by the Palestinians than to let them be kidnapped. And this started with a soldier that got captured, and they had to release like 1,000 Palestinians to get their soldier back, Gilad Shalit or whatever his name was, back 10 years ago. So the policy then that they adopted was, if a soldier is being abducted, go ahead and blow him away too, along with his kidnappers, before they get back.
Okay, so we don't let them get in that position where they've got our hostage and we have to give up so much. Yeah,
that's some pretty crazy state first Eastern thinking, if you ask me. But on the morning of October the 7th, they just on the fly adapted it to civilians too. Not just a soldier who, by the way, they've been conscripted. So it's not like they're, you know, they're combatants, but it's still unfair to me. Mm. But anyway, now they said even civilians being kidnapped and being taken as hostages back into Gaza should be blasted as well. And so then that's what happened. The helicopters and the tanks shot up a bunch of cars, shot up houses with Israeli Jewish civilians inside them. And then they said, look at these horribly burned and charred and disfigured corpses. Can you believe that Hamas would do such a thing? What barbarians Hamas is to fire an Israeli tank around into this house and obliterate this family. And it was the Israelis, helicopter pilots and tank drivers, who did the killings that left the worst visuals, right? All the charred corpses, people blown apart, houses blown up, cars all shot up. That was the Israelis did that to their own people. And then they spun and embellished all these tales about Hamas like Belgian babies on bayonets in order to pretend to cover for their own actions, their own crimes against their own people that they're sworn to protect, and then try to spin it the other way, where Hamas are now not insurgents or even terrorists. Now they're inhuman orcs from beyond hell who would come and commit the absolute most unbelievable atrocities. And they just lied. They just made up lies. Oh yeah, we saw 2 14-year-old girls with ejaculate all over their dead bodies. Lie. Oh, they cut the heads off of babies and then hung their corpses on a clothesline. Lie. Oh, they cut this woman's her corpse open and stole the baby out of her womb. Lie. They took this baby and threw it in an oven. Lie. You know who actually cut the baby out of a woman's womb? It was the IDF who did that at Sabra and Shatila in 1982 when they oversaw the Christian Phalange militia attack the poor Palestinians at the refugee camps in Lebanon. And it was, and you know who threw a baby in the oven? The Israelis during the founding of Israel in 1948. They stole a baby out of a woman's arms and threw it into an oven, as is perfectly well documented. They take their own most sickening, absolute medieval level, Bronze Age crimes and then project them onto their enemies. All those were lies. All of those were lies. And like your mom and dad and next door neighbor believe them. Threw a baby in an oven, cut all their heads off. Joe Biden said, I saw the pictures with all the beheaded babies. Liar. Liar. And that's what the Israelis do, Bob. They lie about everything because the truth is they are the overlord. It's like a plantation master going, Bob, you wouldn't believe the horrible sins of my slaves. Well, screw you, dude. I don't want to hear it. You're the bad guy, period. You shouldn't be holding them in bondage. You have no right to hold them as your slaves in the first place.
Hey, folks, let's take a break from the action to talk about today's sponsor, who is Monetary Metals. Now, Monetary Metals is providing a true alternative to saving and earning in dollars by making it possible to save and earn in gold and silver. Monetary Metals has been paying interest on gold and silver for over 8 years. Right now, accredited investors can earn 12% annual interest on silver paid in silver in their latest silver bond offering. For example, if you have 1,000 ounces of silver in the deal, you receive 120 ounces of silver interest paid to your account in the first year. So go to the link in the description of this show or head to monetary-metals.com/Murphy to learn more about how to participate and start earning a return on honest money again with Monetary Metals. Again, go to the link that's in the description of this particular episode or just go to monetary-metals.com/Murphy to see how you can get on board.
I read one the other day. You should look at this at antiwar.com. They told all the Palestinians to go to Al-Mawasi, which is this essentially like wasteland of sand down, east of Rafah. And they told everyone, this is the safe zone. Everyone go there. So it's just tents. And then they just bomb the crap out of them. Bomb the tents, kill 90-something people. At Mondo Weiss, they interviewed this 16-year-old girl who says she saw this young boy. So, I guess that means what? Over 3 but under 7 or something. Young boy with his legs blown off, got caught in the bombing, crawling on his hands, screaming at the top of his lungs until another bomb fell right on his head and obliterated the rest of him right off the face of the earth, right in front of her eyes. That's what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians every day. You could not come up with a worse level of cruelty. And again, we're talking about a canned hunt. We're talking about people who are trapped in a prison, fish in a barrel. And the Israelis just laugh. It was in Haaretz. We kill them when we're bored. Sometimes we're sitting around bored and then we just start sniping them. They target pregnant women. There's a group of pregnant women trying to get to the hospital. They blow them all away. That's not an accident. And quite frankly, George Bush and Barack Obama, they did some horrible things. And in raw totals, they killed so many more. But you didn't have that. The U.S. Army didn't fight like that. The U.S. Army in Iraq, on their very worst day, the Haditha massacre, that's pretty bad. But they didn't just, blow away a group of pregnant women trying to get to the hospital. Certainly not deliberately. What's happening here, and I've seen soldiers, by the way, say, don't you compare your rules of engagement to us. Don't you invoke the way we fought Iraq War II and say that justifies what you're doing here. How dare you? We did not do that. In Ramadi, boy, we had to have eyes on a target, and he would have had to already squeeze his trigger at us. We don't get to just call in airstrikes on neighborhoods. You crazy? And so what they're doing it's completely medieval. It's far worse than what the Russians are doing to Ukraine. And look at the number of children that they've killed. It's like 10 times higher in a third of the amount of time.
So what is their goal? Like, what's the strategic
Yeah, I mean, it depends like what they think they can get away with. At first, they were blatant about, we want to completely empty this territory of Palestinians. We want to force them into Egypt, force them into the Sinai Peninsula. The Wall Street Journal let 2 Israeli ministers write an article called "You Love Them So Much, You Take Them," and essentially, broadcasting their intent to completely cleanse the Gaza Strip of Palestinians.
Okay, the reason I'm asking, because if that were the goal, then it would make sense why the higher ups would tolerate the kind of things you just rattled off.
Yep.
It's like, no, we want, if the goal is we want these people to realize we have to leave, we can't stay here, this is never going to work.
Yep. And look, so the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal, I think very importantly, have done massive investigative surveys of the damage and compared this directly to Dresden and Hamburg and Tokyo in the Second World War before the Geneva Conventions. And now it's not, now Dresden was like in 2 big nights, right? But here it's the same thing over 9-10 months. It's approximately the same number of people dead and the same degree of percentage of destruction of the landscape. They're completely razing the place to the ground. All the poor people who were buried alive, thousands of people missing who were buried alive in this thing and buried dead, but many of them alive too. They just get bulldozed away. They're just cleaning the whole thing out. You can see it from the satellite pictures and everything. They're just blowing up all the greenhouses, blowing up entire neighborhoods, razing entire neighborhoods and clearing them out entirely. Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who, guess what, of course, happens to be Benjamin Netanyahu's godson. And Benjamin Netanyahu used to sleep in his bed when he would come visit New York City. Jared Kushner says, yeah, we're going to build condos. We're going to kick all the Palestinians out, and we're going to build condos on this beachfront property. He said that in a public speech on video. You can watch it. And so I think we can expect the worst from the Donald Trump regime on this issue. Again, he's so horrible on this, completely bought and paid for by Miriam Adelson, the widow of Sheldon Adelson, who's giving him tens of millions of dollars, and the Republican Party tens of millions of dollars. Already bought his loyalty in the form of recognizing their theft of the Syrian Golan Heights, as well as moving the embassy to Jerusalem and all these things. But back to your question, I believe that the only limit is what the President of the United States says. And if the President of the United States says, no, man, we're not doing a population transfer here. You can bomb the hell out of them. You can kill tens of thousands of them. But no, I'm not allowing you to remove 2 million people. You're not going to be allowed to do that. I think that is the message that they got from the Biden government. And I think that that's the only thing stopping them. And of course, Biden's so crazy that, Netanyahu's coming to town. And I'm like, man, just don't let him alone in a room with Joe Biden, dude. Because he could just come out there saying, yeah, Joe Biden told me I can do whatever I want. And God knows what. And Trump.
Oh, that's interesting. Because I was going to say, yeah, but surely even if he convinced Biden to do something, you're saying, no, it's the other way around. If he walks out of a private meeting, then with Biden's aides not there, Netanyahu can say, oh, guess what? He just told me. Yeah. And so it would be hard. Yeah.
He could probably trick Biden into saying anything too. You know what I mean? And like get it on the record, make him sign it. Why not? Biden is completely out of his head, and Netanyahu has no shame. And he would stop at absolutely nothing. I don't know if I ever told you this anecdote. I forget my source now, but people can look this up. The first time Bill Clinton ever met Netanyahu, they met for half an hour. This is in 1996 when he had first become prime minister the first time. And after the meeting, Clinton said, who in the F does this guy think he is? Oh my God. Like he couldn't believe it. Who's the superpower and who's the client state? He said, because Netanyahu was just like, look here, butler, here's your marching orders, boy. And Bill was just like, what? I'm the emperor of the planet Earth, dude. You can't talk to me like that. And he was like, of course I can. Here's your marching orders. Now march. And like, the level of arrogance there is pretty remarkable. So like, I would say, as much as I don't trust Jake Sullivan, I want Jake Sullivan literally stitched to Joe Biden while Netanyahu is in the room. You know what I mean? I want them like duct taped together with the best stuff you got, to protect Biden from just, selling giving the whole store to the guy. But anyway, I don't know if they think they can get away with the full ethnic cleansing campaign, but they sure would like to. They sure would like to. And I really am worried about what's going to happen when Trump comes in, because he's just going to say, geez, you just don't want a deal, huh? You can just take the whole thing then. What do I care? Because he really doesn't care, I don't know if you ever seen these clips. He's decided this is a great talking point, so he's repeated it 2 or 3 times, where he's like, Bob, I got to tell you, it's such a terrible tragedy that Israel used to completely own the U.S. Congress, 100%. And now all these crazy commie women are in there, like AOC, and they're such anti-Semites and hate Israel. And now it's just such a tragedy that poor Israel doesn't control the U.S. Congress anymore like the way it should be in an ideal situation that we would like to restore again. And just like, you know what I mean? Like, you can make that stuff up and put it in his mouth. Like, that's the way Donald Trump talks about.
I did see that the other day. And you're being a bit hyperbolic for comedic purposes, but like, how does he literally say? Because you're not exaggerating much.
No, well, look, everything he says is to the nth degree, right? So
sure, yeah.
But I mean, hell, I could cue it up. Well, whatever. It's
I'll put a timestamp here. We'll splice it in.
Well, the biggest change I've seen in Congress is Israel literally owned Congress. You understand that 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And it was so powerful. And today it's almost the opposite. You have between AOC and Omar and these people that hate Israel. They hate it with a passion. They're controlling Congress, and Israel is not a force in Congress anymore. It's just amazing. I've never seen such a change. And we're not talking about over a very long period of time. But I think you know exactly what I'm saying. They had such power. Israel had such power, and rightfully, over Congress, and now it doesn't. It's incredible, actually.
Okay, and there are a couple different versions of it. I mean, he has repeated this now 2 or 3 times. This is
I've heard at least him say it once, so I know what you're talking about. Yeah. It is kind of like, are you even listening to what you just said?
Yeah, like I think he said it once, and then was like, yeah, that's pretty good. I like the sound of that. You know what I mean? Then he just started repeating it. It's like a thing that he says now, It's just pretty incredible. And I don't know exactly how this works, man, with the business with Trump, but it seems to me like the New York Times said, and I know this isn't just liquid, but the New York Times said he is a billionaire. Like, he doesn't have 10 billion, but he has like 4 or 5 or something. And it seems like, his children, his grandchildren are so covered. Why doesn't he just sell a few buildings and a couple of golf courses and whatever, and then finance the entire campaign of the Republican Party himself? And I know that, hell, even just for the PR, to be able to say, nobody can buy me, I paid for it all myself, I'm retired, man, I'm only doing this for you, blah, blah, blah. It's such a good line. It'd be worth, spending $100 million just for the line. You know what I mean? It's a great one. And yet he doesn't do that. And he finds himself completely beholden to the likes of Miriam Adelson, who is just the inheritor of a gambling fortune from a guy who owns a casino in China. Like, this is who, I love it, right? Like, back to where we started with the born-again Christians who support all of this. Like, this is who's in charge of what you think. Communist Chinese gambling magnates. They're the ones who bought and sold your Republican Party for Israel, and people have nothing but the most laughable contempt for you, of course, in every way. But they got the money. And so I think Trump had originally actually even said to AIPAC, Bob, in 2016, he goes, I don't need your money. I'm rich. So like, haha. And like, he got in trouble for that because it was like an anti-Semitic trope that Jewish donors have hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, which of course is what he was doing in the room in the first place. Right. But anyway, but then I think somebody whispered in his ear and said, hey, man, but somebody's got to pay for the midterms and somebody's got to pay for your reelection in 4. And he went, oh man, I guess you're right. And then Sheldon Adelson was willing to write a check for $50 million. And then, God, was it more than that? And so this is like this massive payoff to the Republican Party. You just can't cross that. What are you going to do without that? Now, Sheldon Adelson is dead and his wife survives him, but she has the exact same agenda. And this is reported in Haaretz. I was actually skeptical about this at first because I didn't like the original source where I had seen this. And I went and hunted this down. It's in Haaretz that the deal on offer is that she'll give him, I think it's 500 million. I think I screwed up when I said 50. I think it was 500 last time. And I think it's 500 million this time if he will promise to let Israel annex the whole West Bank. And I don't think the reporting is that he's made that deal, but I think that's what is at issue. And that would be a whole other massive cleansing
What's
campaign.
funny is people. Prima facie, like, isn't that illegal to say if you do something, if you promise to do something once elected, but yet what else is a campaign except, saying I'm going to do all these things for you if you vote for me.
That's right. And look, and he's lived up to his promises to them in the past. And one more thing, let me shoehorn in here. And I'm sorry that this is out of order for everybody's narrative here to explain, but this goes to Trump and his previous term in office. As I said, Trump's son-in-law is Netanyahu's godson, Jared Kushner.
I don't think I knew that.
Clearly operating, well, whatever. I'm not going to say he's an Israeli agent and question his loyalty, but of course it's easy for a guy like that to not see a difference between Israel's interests and America's interests. And so he can operate in that fashion and pass the lie detector, maybe, but Trump had such a Zionist foreign policy, and it culminated in what was called the Netanyahu Doctrine. And there are two major facets of this. The first one is that they're going to bribe the Sunni states with our money to normalize relations with Israel in what were called the Abraham Accords without the Palestinians getting a deal. Now, all these Sunni kingdoms had always promised that they would never normalize relations with Israel until the Palestinians either got citizenship in a single state or a state of their own in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And but what Kushner figured out was, well, the American people can afford it. So what's your price? And so they gave Bahrain F-16s, UAE F-35s, Sudan debt forgiveness, and they recognized Morocco's seizure of the northern part of Western Sahara, which is a nation state there just south of Morocco on the northwestern coast of Africa. And in exchange for this, these states then normalized relations with Israel. And so to Netanyahu, this was the total victory of his policy. And he gave a speech at the United Nations in late September of 22, just like 2 weeks before the October 7th attack. And in the speech, I'm roughly paraphrasing here, but you can read it for yourself. He essentially gloats. Ha ha, I win, you lose. He holds up a map, as he often does when he speaks at the UN Security Council. He has a visual aid. He held up a map of the Middle East and all of Israel. There's no occupied territory on there. It's all marked as Israel. And he draws a line with all the Sunni states. It says, here's my alliance with the Sunni states. And he calls it the New Middle East. And with that, he was mocking Shimon Peres, who had been Yitzhak Rabin's successor and had inherited Rabin's policy of let's negotiate with the Palestinians and make peace with the Palestinians so that we can negotiate and make peace with the Sunni states so that we can ally with them against the Iranians, right? Remember I told you Rabin had turned on Iran in the early 90s there. And so Netanyahu is mocking Rabin and Perez's legacy there. And it's saying, here's the new Middle East. That was Perez's phrase, the new Middle East.
Right.
He says, here's the new Middle East, but I didn't have to compromise with the Palestinians at all. I didn't have to give them anything. I win everything. They get nothing. No citizenship, no state. They're just going to have to learn to get used to and like living on their reservation. And as we continue to settle it, and there's nothing that they can do about it. And so that was the setup. That was the imperial hubris. leading right up to the attack of October 7th. And then the other major facet of the Netanyahu doctrine was keeping the Palestinian people divided and conquered by supporting Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Now, I know you're probably familiar with some of the earlier history as detailed by Andrew Higgins in the Wall Street Journal and Richard Sale in UPI. Of course, Jeremy R. Hammond in his great book, Obstacle to Peace. Trita Parsi in his book, Treacherous Alliance, as well, documents how Israel abetted, they didn't create it, but they abetted the rise of Hamas deliberately in the first place, back in the late 1980s and into the 1990s, in order to divide and conquer the Palestinians, to create a right-wing religious alternative to the sort of secular commie nationalist PLO of Yasser Arafat. And that was why they created it in the first place. And sorry, I know we're running short on time. What happened was Rice and Bush forced them to hold an election in 2006. And Hamas won the election. But you should know, and it's very important because this falls into a talking point that the War Party uses. Hamas did not win a majority in any single district in Palestine, anywhere in the West Bank or the Gaza Strip or East Jerusalem. They won a plurality only, and they won a majority in the parliament. The way it worked out, they did get a majority in the parliament. It was still a bare enough majority that they had to form a coalition government with, or maybe it wasn't even a majority in the parliament. Maybe it was a plurality in the parliament, and they still had to form a coalition government with Fatah to take over governing responsibilities such as they are. We're talking about trustees in an Israeli prison here, to keep it in context for you, but still. And so they had to form a coalition government. And then you can read a great article about this by David Rose. It's in Vanity Fair, but still, it's a good piece. It's called The Gaza Bombshell from 2007. And it's about how America, under Elliot Abrams, who's Bill Kristol's brother-in-law and Donald Trump's favorite neocon, Elliot Abrams worked with the Israelis and the Egyptians to attempt a coup d'etat and funneled a bunch of weapons into Fatah. That's Yasser Arafat's old group, the secular commie nationalist types, to try to overthrow Hamas. But it failed and it blew up in their face. Hamas got wind of it, captured the weapons, and drove Fatah out of there. And it was only then that Hamas took over the Strip, and which Ariel Sharon had abandoned in the first place, again, in order to prevent the peace process from going forward. And to put this very simply, well, first of all, here's your footnote, okay? It's by myself and Connor Freeman. That's my guy at the Institute. And we wrote this piece for the Institute and antiwar.com last fall. It's called Netanyahu's Support for Hamas Backfired. And we prove it to your satisfaction, I promise. The policy was, as they stated over and over again, if you want to prevent a Palestinian state, you have to support Hamas, because then you can say, we have no partner for peace. You don't expect us to negotiate with these terrorists, do you? Now, even Donald Trump said about Mahmoud Abbas, who is the leader of Fatah, said, oh, he's a very nice, fatherly sort of figure. I thought he was a very sweet and sincere man, and I thought he wanted to make a deal. We don't like that. No, sir. Not in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. That's not what they want to hear. They're afraid of that. As Smotrich said, the PA is a liability. Hamas is an asset. Because then they can say to you and me and America,
PA being Palestinian Authority.
I'm sorry?
PA being Palestinian Authority.
Yes. So they can then, if as long as Hamas is in charge of the Gaza Strip, then the Israeli government can say to you and me and the U.S. government and the European governments and even the liberals in Tel Aviv that we have no partner for peace. You don't expect us to allow there to be a Palestinian state under the control of these crazy terrorists, do you? Right. And so they said it, Bob, and it's in my article. They said it over and over and over again. Why do we support Hamas in Gaza? As a cynical ploy to stave off pressure to allow for independence for a Palestinian state. And Netanyahu said, don't worry, we control the height of the flame. Right? So the point is, The Netanyahu doctrine is, one, make peace with the Sunni Arab kings over the dead bodies of the Palestinians, and they are forsaken, while at the same time propping up a bunch of terrorists in order to have the excuse that you don't expect us to deal with these people, do you? And that was the policy that blew up on October 7th. So now back to like your question of all your listeners wondering, oh, so they're just supposed to sit back and let this kind of stuff happen to them? It's the Israeli government making this stuff happen. All of it. We're talking about pawns on a chessboard, but the chessboard belongs to the Israeli regime. They ruled the entire situation.
Okay. As you said, Scott, I do have to wrap it up here, but what you just said there is great because I wanted to be provocative and, have something dramatic to wrap up this epic conversation. Clearly, some people who have listened to this, they didn't like what you just went through and they don't believe you. And they're saying, okay, Scott, so I have to say, like, all the news story, all this stuff, all the official narrative of the Israelis are sitting there, civilized people, scientists, doctors, poets, Nobel Prize winners in various fields, minding their own business, being completely Western civilized, place. And then these savages come in and do all this stuff. And you're telling me, oh, no, actually, Netanyahu himself on record has supported them. And so I want to say, clearly, folks, if that's your view, if what Scott is saying about Netanyahu supporting Hamas is right, surely you have to realize you've been lied to by the media and everybody. And now, Scott, I want to say to you, are you saying just if someone who's open-minded, if they go and read that piece that you co-authored, that has what, if they want to know the truth, it's right there for them?
It's right there. And that, okay. And by the way, there's been a few more pieces developing the story since we wrote that, including one in the New York Times called Buying Quiet. But ours, it's Connor Freeman and myself. Mm-hmm. It's called.
And I'll link to it, obviously, but go ahead and say what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. It's Netanyahu's support for Hamas backfired. And it's all full of so many direct quotes, and including all people from his party explaining. One of them is saying, you fools, you just don't appreciate the Machiavellian brilliance of our great leader, Netanyahu, and what he's doing here. Right. And then, as I say, Smotrich saying, as blatant as could be, repeating himself over and over again, the PA is a liability. Hamas is an asset. Mm-hmm. Because they're terrorists, because they're bad guys. It makes it easier for us to fool Bob Murphy's audience into thinking that poor little us is in such a terrible situation. You wouldn't dare force us to deal with such monsters, would you?
Let me just make sure we don't set them up wrongly and they feel betrayed. You're not claiming, right, that October 7th was an inside job.
No,
and that Netanyahu, absolutely. Right? Just be clear as to what you're telling people. The claim is that they can go to your article and verify.
Again, Netanyahu said, we control the height of the flame. Right. Again, as I say, Netanyahu's support for Hamas backfired. And as I was explaining before, they were completely negligent and derelict in their duty to protect their people from the prisoners that they had captured in there.
But then, of course, once October 7th happened, then they exploited that. Like, okay, given that just happened, even though we kind of weren't watching them as carefully as we should have been. Now, okay, well, send in the tanks and the bombers because why don't we go ahead and do it, or the missiles, whatever.
And look, I mean, the problem and this is one of the main problems I really have with Israel, is they just lie about everything. So in other words, like what you're talking about is that like the Israelis have suborned good people in your audience to be their accomplices, at least in spirit, right? That like poor little Israel, what would they do? They would all be enslaved and butchered and raped and converted by these heathens if they didn't do things this way. But that's not true. That's the excuse of a bunch of liars so they can get away with crime, so they can get away with sadistic murder. And the only reason we don't call the Palestinians slaves, Bob, is because the Israelis don't want them, right? They don't want to make them work for free. They want them to drop dead so they can steal their land. That's it.
That's the thing. They want the land.
Rights.
Is your argument? Yeah.
Yeah. No Palestinian has a right, and Israeli is bound to respect. It is absolutely a criminal situation. That's why they call it apartheid. And why would Jimmy Carter call it apartheid? Because he hates Jews so much? No, it's because that's what it is when a minority rules the majority under a totalitarian police state. That's what it is. It's apartheid. And that's why when Netanyahu in 2020 said we're going to go ahead and annex the rest of the West Bank, or at least major parts of the West Bank, which Trump's government asked him to back down on that, and he finally did. But once he declared, and these are his exact words, and he said this year and last year as well, but he said this in 2020, it is one state. It will always be one state. There will always be only one security force that controls all the land from the river to the sea. So when the Palestinians say from the river to the sea, Palestinians will be, or Palestine will be free, Netanyahu says from the river to the sea, Israel will always control all this land, including the Palestinians who get nothing. But it will always be one state. And they will be no more than helots in it forever. And once he announced that, then you had Beth Salem, which is the Israeli human rights group in Tel Aviv, and also Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International all put out their giant reports. They were all published in early 2021. These massive reports detailing, describing, revealing Israeli apartheid. That's exactly what it is. You know, Netanyahu's predecessor, Ehud Olmert, said, if we don't let these people go, we're going to be facing an apartheid situation. We've got to do a two-state solution so that they can go, so that we can have our Jewish state, 80-20 supermajority Jewish state. But it's got to be within the 67 borders. It can't be when we're occupying 5 million people with no rights. It won't work. It's not tenable for the long term. So if Ehud Olmert says that, who was Ariel Sharon's right-hand man, he's not a man of the left. He comes from Ariel Sharon's Kadima party. And Sharon, of course, was the famous Israeli right-wing general and former partner in Likud with Netanyahu. So if Ehud Olmert calls it apartheid, that's because it is. That's it. Mm-hmm. And by the way, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the great hero of South Africa in the 1980s, said the apartheid in Israel-Palestine blows South Africa away. He says we need a new word for it. It's far worse than South Africa in the 80s. The only reason the American people aren't with this is because they're just lied to all damn day. They're propagandized all day. But really, why would it be that Ben Shapiro is right about anything? It's not like he's honest.
Well, are you a fan of his rapping ability?
You know what? I never even hit play on that.
It was actually better than I thought it was going to be. I will say that. I like.
You know what? You are very generous to people singing karaoke, Bob. It's one of the things I really like about you, dude, is you are so kind.
Well, it's more fun when more people get involved. All right, we do need to stop it up there. Obviously, I could go a long time with this, listening to you go through it. So my guest has been Scott Horton of the Libertarian Institute, everybody. Of course, contribute. Put the links in the show notes page to everything Scott's been talking about. Scott, thanks so much for the great work you're doing, and just keep it up.
Thank you so much, Bob. Appreciate you, man.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. See you next time.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.